Waiting for people to join. If you're having trouble with the sound, please let us know. It was on mute. If people have questions as we're going along, I would encourage you to please write them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we answer questions as they come up if we can, and if not, we'll circle back to those questions and answer them later in the presentation. We're going to give folks just a couple more minutes. For those of you who are watching, it would be great if you're not already muted, if you could mute your microphones just so that we don't have sound feedback. Welcome. Whenever you're ready, if you want to go ahead and share the presentation.
Yeah, hello, Heather. I'll show your presentation.
All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Really appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. My name is Heather Latino. I work at the U.S. Embassy in Bishkek in the Public Affairs section, and I came this past August. And so I appreciate all of you sharing your country with me. I'm looking forward to talking with you a little bit about my college experience, and want to thank my two guests who are here with me today. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Dylan Schwartz.
Hello, everyone. My name is again Dylan Schwartz. I work here in the U.S. Embassy Bishkek with the security team. I came last year in October, so I've been here a little over a year now. I've enjoyed the country very much, and I'm grateful to be out here.
And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Danny, to introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Butterfoss. I work here at the Embassy in Bishkek in the consular section. So that means if you come here to get a visa, you might end up talking to me. But today I'm here to talk about my college experience in the United States. And I've just been here in the country for about a month, but so far I really like it, and I'm looking forward to living here for the next 2 years.
Great. If we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Dylan to talk a little bit about why he chose to go to Glen Oaks Community College, and some of the pros and cons of choosing a community college.
All right, thank you guys for joining us. My college was Glen Oaks Community College. It's a small town college in Centerville, Michigan. And if some of you aren't aware of where Michigan is, it's right next to Canada, pretty easy to find. The reason I actually chose this college is my last year of high school. They did a dual enrollment program. So I was able to do college along with my high school. So that was a big part in choosing this college because they had a great program with my high school. And then also after high school, I continued to go to this college for about a year. It's a little bit smaller. They only have about 12 to 1,400 students enrolled. It might be a little more now. I know before I left, they were getting ready to build dorms on campus, so that could potentially expand the amount of people enrolled. Glen Oaks is a little bit smaller, obviously, than a couple of these other colleges that you hear about. But some of the benefits is that you get to know the community and you get to know the teachers, and it might not be as big of classes as other colleges. Usually it ranges from about 20 to 25 people to one teacher. So if you have questions or you need a little bit extra help, you kind of have more of a connection with the teacher than a larger college per se. This college has a lot of great programs. They're well known for their agriculture, their nursing, and their automotive programs. Those are the main three. Obviously, they have some other ones, and it was a great college. And as we go on, I'll continue to talk a little more into certain things of the college.
Dylan, I understand that Glen Oaks is located in Centerville, Michigan. Can you talk a little bit about Centerville, how big it is, and what the town is like?
So it's a smaller town, like I said earlier. I believe the population is maybe 5,000, maybe not even that. I'm not 100% sure. It's very small. There's not even a big grocery store or anything inside the village. You have to kind of travel about 20 minutes away to a bigger city to do some activities, but the community is great. The small town living, like I said, you kind of get to know everyone in your area and have connections with people. So it's a little more formal, I guess you could say, than bigger cities where you might not know your neighbor and have a different style of living.
Great. And my apologies because I'm not super familiar with Michigan geography, but what would be the closest city to Centerville?
So one of the bigger cities is Kalamazoo, and that's within Michigan. It's about 45 minutes away. A bigger city that everyone might recognize is Chicago or Detroit. They're both about an hour and a half away from where I'm from in Centerville.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Would turn it over to Danny to share about why he chose to go to New York University and some of the pros and cons of selecting a private university.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Dylan. As Heather just mentioned, I went to New York University, but I'm originally from the city of St. Paul in the state of Minnesota. And it's actually pretty close to Michigan. It's also on the border with Canada. And St. Paul is a smaller city. So I don't know where everyone is from on this session today, but you might feel the same way as I did when I was 18, is that even though I liked my hometown a lot, I really wanted to see something new, something different, something big. So that's why I chose to go to school in New York City, which is obviously a very big city. Some of the advantages of that are that at a large private university, you get a really high quality of professors. A lot of my professors were experts in their field. But I think even more than that, you get access to a lot of opportunities that the city provides. So I was not only learning in the classroom, but I remember visiting, the United Nations in New York or going to visit the New York Times. So those were really cool opportunities that you might not have had at a smaller place. Some of the disadvantages, though, are that, as you can see on the slide, private universities and especially New York University are very expensive. So even though I was lucky to have my parents helping me, I got some scholarships, I still had to take out a lot of loans to pay for school. And it took me about 10 years to pay off all of those loans. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're thinking about where you want to go to college.
Danny, one of the questions that came up in the chat was whether the status or the prestige of your university can help with employment in getting a job. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. And it's something that you have to think about carefully and what's best for your own situation. I was just doing some research before this, and NYU, New York University, which is also known as NYU, they do show that they say that 85% of their recent graduates are working. So that's a pretty high statistic. You could say that maybe it's because they went to a prestigious university like New York University. But I would caution you that it's not necessary to go to a university that has a big name recognition like NYU or some of the other famous universities you've heard of. You can definitely go to a smaller university and also find a really good job.
And in contrast to Centerville, Michigan, New York City is a major city. Can you talk about some of the pros and cons of living in a city like New York City?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, some of the advantages of going to a school in a big city like New York is that you have a lot of academic opportunities in the city, but that also extends to just in your personal life. So when I was living in New York, I had access to all of the, restaurants, shows, concerts, sporting events. So basically anything you could want was there in New York. Some of the disadvantages, again, like I mentioned, the tuition is expensive, but also living in the city is really expensive. So while I had access in theory to all of these wonderful things, and sometimes as a university student, it was hard to pay for everything that I would have liked to do. So those are some of the pros and cons.
Great. And if I could share a little bit about where I went to school. I went to the University of Montana, which is located in Missoula, Montana. Montana is located in the northwest part of the United States, on the border of Canada. And my school's somewhere in between the schools that Dylan and Danny went to, both in terms of size and in terms of cost. So there's about 8,000 undergraduate students, and it's a public university, which is a little bit different than a private university. It means that it's largely funded by tax dollars and state revenue, which keeps the cost a little bit lower than at a private university, for example. That also means that sometimes there aren't as many scholarships available as you might be able to get at a private university. One of the things that was also thinking about as both of you were talking is that some of my classes were very large, which is what you would expect at a bigger school, with 200 to 300 students in the class. And then some of my classes were also very small, where we might have like 5 to 10 students in the classroom. And so I had both of those experiences when I was going there. I chose the school largely for 2 reasons. One was that it had the academic program that I was looking for. I wanted to study political science, and it was a school that offered that. And then geographically, it was located close to my family. And at that point in my life, I was happy to be a couple hours away, but still wanted to be close to them. And so that was one of the things that factored into my decision. So I'd like to shift a little bit now. So we're going to shift and talk about campus life and attending universities and colleges in the United States and that experience. So we can go ahead and switch to the next slide. And I'm going to go ahead and have you start, Dylan, if that's okay. And if you could tell us a little bit about where you lived while you were attending school, why you chose that particular option, and some of the pros and cons.
Okay. Like I said earlier, when I started doing my college experience, I was in high school. So for that year, I lived at home with my parents. And then my second year of college, I did end up getting my own apartment. So kind of had to juggle a lot of things as far as like doing a job and stuff. But as far as campus life goes, I chose to live off campus just because my campus at the time did not have housing. Like I said, they did build dorms now, so there is on-campus living. So I can't really speak as far as living on campus experience, But as far as living off campus, obviously you kind of have a little bit more freedom. You don't have the rules per se of maybe living in a college dorm. Yeah.
And Danny, did you live on campus while you were attending school? And if so, did you choose to do that for part of your university experience or all of it?
Yeah, so I lived in a dormitory for the first 3 years of my college. And then my last year, my senior year, I lived in an apartment off campus, you could say. And I agree with what Dylan was saying. The experience of living in a dorm was really fun because you're surrounded by hundreds of people your own age and your classmates. So that part of it's really fun. It's convenient because, for example, my dormitory had a dining hall on the first floor, so you could just go downstairs and eat. But then again, on the flip side, living with hundreds of people in the same building, you don't get a lot of privacy. So it wasn't until I had my own apartment that I had my own bedroom. Yeah, Dylan mentioned the rules. So you put a lot of 18 and 19-year-old kids together, and sometimes it's tempting to break the rules. So there was that to consider when living on campus as well.
And I also had a similar experience where I lived on campus for the first year of my college experience. One of the things that I really liked about that is it kind of helped me to gradually transition to being an adult, because food was cooked for me for the first year. I didn't have to find a place to live. I just had to select a dorm, didn't have to worry about paying rent each month. I just paid my tuition bill. And I felt like that was one of the things that was really helpful as I was trying to study and get accustomed to college living, was to have that year where just some of the basic things were taken care of. I didn't have to worry about kind of taking care of an apartment, and was things were more accessible being on campus. But then I also appreciated being able to move off campus, where the cost of living, at least for me, where I was at, was a little bit less expensive once I moved off campus. And that was part of my decision, not to live in the dorms as well. And then that allowed me to focus a little bit more on my studies as I was in the latter part of my academic studies. The dorm that I lived in was kind of what I think of as a traditional dorm, where two people lived in one room. I don't know, Danny, was that your experience, or did you have kind of a different dorm setup where you went to school?
I think mine was similar. My first year, my dorm, I was in a dorm room with 3 people, including myself. My second year was 4 people, but there were 2 separate bedrooms. And my third year was the same. It was 4 people, but 2 separate bedrooms.
And were any of the dorms on your campus specific to particular interests or backgrounds? Is there a particular way that you would select where you would live?
At my university, I don't remember there being specific entire dorms for specific interests, but for example, my freshman year, my first year, there were certain floors on the dorm that were meant for people of certain interests. So I signed up to live on a floor with other people who were interested in sports. So that was really fun because we could play sports with each other, and also we had organized group activities to go to different sporting events in New York City.
Great. I think the university that I went to had housing that was specific for international students, but there were also floors similar to what you described. So for people who were really academically oriented, there was a floor for the honors college, as an example. Some people also chose locations if they wanted a quiet floor. And so there were ways to kind of sort out where you would live. I'd like to transition and talk a little bit about kind of what you did outside of school. And so I don't know, were you engaged in any extracurricular activities, clubs, or sports while you were going to school? Or were you just focused on academics?
So for the most part, it was mainly academics. As living off campus and being in my own apartment, I had to have my own job. to pay the bills for tuition and my apartment. So I kind of focused a little more on just doing my general classes and then doing my job in order to live. So I didn't really pick up any extra academics, but I do know that Glen Oaks has those programs and they do offer like clubs such as government clubs or health clubs or agriculture clubs.
Great. And how about you?
I, like Dylan, I was focused a lot on academics, and also part of my financial aid was that I needed to have an on-campus job. So I was working a lot as well. And that's actually one of my regrets about my time in college, is that I didn't do more of those clubs or extracurriculars, because NYU had basically a club for anything that you could think of. I did participate in intramural sports, which is kind of a club. It's just sort of an informal sports league, not like the university team or anything, but just for people who want to play casually. And one activity that I really wish I would have joined is that I wish I would have participated in the student newspaper, because that was something that I was interested in and always wanted to do, but never felt like I had time.
I ended up doing some activities, particularly early on in school. So student government was one of the things that I chose to participate in. And that was a really great experience. Just gave me an opportunity to try out being involved in politics and see whether or not that is something that I would enjoy as a career. Helped me decide that I might want to shift my academic focus after my undergraduate degree. And so having that opportunity to kind of do something practical that was related to my major was something that I really appreciated. But like both of you, I also worked throughout school, primarily on campus, but also off campus as well. So it's interesting, we all have that in common. One of the questions that was posed by a colleague of mine was about internship opportunities, like while you're going to school. Dylan, do you have any sense of like whether there were internship opportunities or even like practicum type opportunities at the school that you went to?
Yeah, so I know Glen Oaks obviously is known for their nursing program. So a lot of it is done on campus, but then they actually allow some of those nursing students to go out to doctor's offices or hospitals, depending on the field, I guess you could say, that they want to go into, as far as like ER or X-ray tech. So they allowed them to go out and they would do some of their internship as part of their classwork. So there's definitely opportunities for that. And then obviously the agriculture, they went out, my college actually had all the farm equipment that you would need. So you could go out into the field, and that would be part of your class, is to spend the day out in the field doing different types of farm work. So there's definitely opportunities for interning.
Great. Danny, what about at your school? Can you talk a little bit about what sorts of internship opportunities there were, whether they took place like while you were going to school, or were things that you did like during breaks or summer breaks?
Yeah, at my university, there were a lot of internship opportunities. I think it's relatively easy to find an internship, especially at a big school in a big city. But one of the problems is that these are often unpaid internships. So it's basically like a job, but you're not paid. It's a volunteer type job. So for that reason, I was only able to do one internship while I was in college, and I was working on a political campaign for one semester. And so that was I was going to classes and then also working.
So let's shift gears a little bit and we'll talk about academic programs. Danny, we'll like switch it up a little bit and we'll start with you.
Okay.
Can you tell us what you studied and why you chose that major?
Yes, I actually did two majors at the same time. I studied international relations and journalism. And the reason I chose that is because when I was in high school, I just really loved reading newspapers and magazines, which are things that no one really reads anymore. But at the time, I really liked it. And I was also really interested in traveling and other countries and other cultures. So that's why I chose to study international relations. And I had a dream of becoming a foreign correspondent. So that's why I chose to combine those two.
And Dylan, can you tell us like what you studied and why you chose that particular program
Absolutely.
or what you're studying currently?
So I am still studying, actually. I am studying law enforcement, so criminal justice. The reason I chose this study is ever since I was little, I've always wanted to help people or like educate people on certain laws. Mainly it's the helping part. So I know law enforcement and like emergency service personnel, they really have the biggest hand in helping people on their worst days. So that is one major reason I decided to go into criminology. I have my associates and I'm still working toward my bachelor's, which we'll probably talk about here in a little bit when I explain some degree stuff, but.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into talking a little bit about some of the different types of degrees that you can get. So if you could take that and go ahead and explain like what an associate's degree is. And I think your school also offered certificate programs. And so if you could also explain those at the same time, that would be fantastic.
I'm not too sure on those ones, so I might have to rely on you guys to answer for those programs. But as far as degrees, the associate's degree is more of your basic degree. It's the first one you'll obtain along the long line, a list of degrees you could potentially get. Just the order, if you guys aren't aware, is associates, bachelor's, and then you go into your master's, and then you can go further on depending on the degree, and if it allows you to go, you can go on to your doctorate. So your associates is about 2 years worth of classes, depending on how many classes you're taking. It could take a little longer and it could be sooner. It just depends on how academically involved you are with your classes. And then bachelor's usually takes about 4 years. Again, that just relies on how academically active you are. You could get it maybe a little bit sooner, or it could take a little bit longer depending on the class load you can take.
And Danny, you got a bachelor's degree.
Yes, so I got a bachelor's degree and it took me 4 years, and that's the normal amount of time. I think you could potentially do it in less time, but in my personal opinion, that would be really, really difficult. And then it could also take you longer than 4 years, depending on, like Dylan said, how many classes you're taking at one time.
And do you have a sense of how long it takes to get a master's degree for folks who might be interested in that?
I think a typical master's degree is 2 years. I know that depending on what you're studying and what program, there are master's degrees, I think as short as 1 year, and then some that may go up to 3 years.
And I studied political science. Part of my learning process was deciding that I did not necessarily want to go into politics. And so when I continued my studies, I went on and got a law degree, which is a Juris Doctorate in the United States, and that's a 3-year program. I think a certificate program, and you should jump in and correct me if I'm mistaken, is often tied to a very specific trade. And so, for example, if you're going to be working as a paralegal, like supporting a law office, you might get a paralegal certificate, which shows that you have some of the skills that would be helpful in that specific profession. So like very specific to a particular trade is my sense.
I think you're right, because as far as the nursing program, they would get certificates, which would help them excel into once they graduate to getting a better job.
Right. And one of the things that we didn't talk about, I don't know if either of you switched like what you were studying along the way, and whether you have any thoughts on that, whether it impacted how long it took you to get your degree, or whether you decided not to switch in order to keep your degree at the time frame that you anticipated getting it. So if you could share whether you ever changed your major, and if you didn't, if that was part of your thought process in deciding not to.
I could start. So I didn't end up changing my major, but I think what helped me was that, and I think this is true of a lot of 4-year universities, is that the first year, you don't have to decide yet what your major is going to be. So basically you spend your first year taking general requirements that almost everybody has to take. And then you might have a chance to, if you're thinking about, like I was thinking about journalism and thinking about international relations, I took maybe 1 or 2 classes in those areas. And I decided that, yes, I do want to study those for my majors. And so then my second year was when I declared that I was going to study those. And then I started taking more specific classes on those topics. But it is possible to switch. I would just say that you would have to, you would hopefully switch relatively early on in your studies, because once you start taking the specific courses for your major, and then if you decide to switch to a different major, not all of those courses might count for your new major, and you might end up having to go to school for longer than you originally planned.
I would definitely agree with Danny. The first year, you usually take all your general classes before taking your degree specific classes, just so that way it gives you time to kind of research about different pathways. And then it allows you to choose to make sure, so that way you're not spending the most amount of money. As far as myself, I did not switch also. I continued down the same path, just because I knew from the start that criminology and criminal justice is where I wanted to be. So I thought about changing it, but for the most part, I've wanted to stick with mine. So.
And one thing we haven't talked about yet are minors and emphases. I don't know if either of you had a minor or an emphasis, but if you did, if you could share like what that was and how you chose that particular one.
I did have a minor. I had a minor in Spanish because, as I mentioned before, one of my majors was international relations. And so for that major, there were certain requirements, certain classes I had to take. And one of the requirements for anyone studying international relations was to learn a foreign language. So I had to take a certain number of foreign language classes just for my major. And then when I met the requirement, I found out that I only needed to take 2 more Spanish classes, and then I would be considered to have a Spanish minor. So I thought, I like Spanish, I'm going to continue studying 2 more Spanish classes, and I got my minor. So basically what that means is on my degree, it says I majored in international relations and journalism, and I had a minor in Spanish. And that just means that I took many classes, but not as many classes in Spanish as in the other topics.
I think that's funny. That's very similar to my spouse's experience. He studied geography, and I think like around his junior year, we were looking like you need like 2 more classes to get a minor in Asian studies. And so that's how he ended up with a minor in Asian studies. So I feel like that's a very common path that some of us go down. You know, like both of you have talked about some of the things that you did on top of your studies, like outside of the classroom. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed your time, like how you juggled both the responsibilities of working and going to school at the same time? Maybe we can start with you, Dylan.
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things for me is even in high school, I struggled with studies. So I really had to give myself time to study and like make sure that I did the studying. So when I was in college and I had my job when I was living on my own, I definitely had to set aside a couple hours a day that were specific for studying. And like I did nothing else during those couple of hours besides study. Obviously, if I finished my studies, I would take that time to go do something else. But for the most part, I definitely had to set up certain times for certain things just to make myself pass and to actually study the material on top of trying to juggle the job and all the bills that I had to pay. So you definitely just have to have time management discipline very more often than none. Even with not working, you can really fall behind if you don't have time management. So.
Danny, you have any particular tips about time management that you could share with the audience?
This was, I'll just be honest, one of the most challenging things for me in college was time management, and why I have some regrets about how I managed my times, because I was very focused on academics and I was also working. And then in that little time that I had left, I tried to have fun. And like I mentioned before, when we were talking about extracurriculars and clubs, looking back, I wish I would have spent a little bit more time and had a chance to participate in those. But yeah, listening to Dylan talk, it's definitely true. You have to be disciplined. I was talking about living in a dorm earlier, and I found that for me to get any studying done, I had to take my work outside of the dorm and go to either the library or to some other place, because there's a lot of temptation to just have fun with your friends when you're surrounded by them all the time. So yeah, I think time management is a challenge, but if you're disciplined, you can make it work.
Yeah. I also found time management really difficult when I was in undergrad. I think I got better at it over time. By the time I was in law school, I did what you were wisely doing at a much younger age, where I really tried to carve out like a set amount of time each day that I would focus on my studies. And so would do my classes, and then I would make sure that I studied for like a set number of hours each day during the weekday. And I really wished that I had been that disciplined when I was doing my undergraduate program. I saw a couple of like really interesting questions come through in the chat that were focused on paying for school, and the questions about student loans, and how to balance all of that. So one of the things that I want to point out related to some of the questions about student loans and student debt and where to look for student loans, how much it will cover, is later this week, there will be a session on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and that will be put on by one of the Education USA representatives. And they'll be talking about studying in the United States. And that person's a great resource in terms of some of like the practical aspects of how do you apply, what TOEFL score do you need, like how do you take the GRE, writing essays, and these types of questions about financing your education, I think are really great questions to pose in that forum. It's not something that I think it's different for each person and different for each school. My general advice would be that if you're trying to figure out what types of aid, financial aid might be available for you, would be to Google the school that you're interested in studying at, look for international students, scholarships, financial aid, and see what that specific school says about what's available, and then follow up with that university. But would encourage you to attend the session later this week called Education in the USA and pose those questions there.
Kızım neresi set gitti vermeden?
And
Kızı bilerek
sorry, I think that there might have been a question. I had trouble hearing it. If you have a question and want to write it in the chat, that would be great. And we'll keep an eye on those and try to catch questions as they come in.
Yeah, and Heather, if I could just add to what you were saying, if when you're doing your research, I would advise you that pretty much every college or university will have something called an Office of Financial Aid, and you should be able to hopefully find like an email address on their website, and that you could contact that office directly if you have questions about financing. So that might just direct your search a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate you adding that. And I think this is a great time to maybe talk like just a little bit about international students. And so we can shift focus to like being an international student studying abroad. Maybe we can start with you, Danny. Do you have a sense of like whether there were international students at New York University? Did you interact with any of them? Do you have any insight on that experience?
Yeah, that was actually one of the cool parts about going to New York University, is that it's a very international university. I was just looking up some stats before this, and the most recent class is actually 25% international students, so from outside the United States. And I remember just personally on my floor freshman year, there were kids from Korea, there were kids from India, there was people from all over. So there were definitely a lot of international students. And they had at NYU, there's an Office of Global Services, which helps students with mostly with visas, getting their immigration paperwork in order to come to the United States. And then once the international students arrive, there's an International Student Center, and that basically does everything from a special welcome orientation for international students from outside the United States to internationally focused events throughout the year, and as well as networking. It connects current international students with international students who have graduated. So there's a really vibrant international student community at NYU.
And Dylan, do you have any sense of whether there were like a number of international students at the school that you attended?
So I'm not entirely sure how many international students we had at Glen Oaks, just being a smaller town, smaller college. It's not really foreseen internationally, but they do have an international program. So you would just have to kind of go on the website and look around about that. I honestly don't have too much information on it, but I do know they do have a little bit of a program for international students.
Great. And my experience was similar to yours, Danny, in that like my university also has like a specific like program for global studies. I forget the exact name of it, but it's geared towards assisting students who are international students with attending the school, if that's something that they want to do, providing them with resources, the right information about how to go through the application process, how to obtain a visa, and what type of paperwork they might need to have in order. And then also had, as I mentioned earlier, like a specific organization for international students to help them network and be connected with one another. Do either of you have any sense of whether or not the schools that you went to offer like scholarship opportunities for students who are studying at that school from overseas?
I don't have specific information about scholarships for international students, but I would imagine if you got in touch with that Office of Global Services, I think it was called, they might have more information for you about that.
I think I'm in about the same boat as Danny. I would imagine that there are some programs out there. I just don't know how big or how little they're going to be for them.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I believe there are probably scholarship opportunities available through specific universities or colleges. And then there's also, I think, more general programs for students who are looking to study in the United States and they don't quite know where they're going to go yet.
Great. Do either of you have any tips, like just for students who might be interested in studying in the United States? I can start with you, Danny.
Just a really general tip, I would say, keep practicing your English any chance that you get. It's great that you're on this webinar listening to us speak English because for me, I think that would be one of the most challenging things about studying in a different country would be not only trying to study and get good grades, but doing it in a second language. So yeah, just keep practicing your English. And then if anybody's really interested and wants to know more about the student visa process, I'm going to be giving another talk on Thursday. So in the same information that you got to sign up for this event, you should also see the link for that one if you want to join and learn more of that.
Mahama, if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, I think it might have information about some of the sessions that will be offered later this week, and then we'll switch back to Dylan to get his tips as well. But today's session is just part of a broader program to provide all of you with as much information as possible about different opportunities that might be available to you if you are interested in studying in the United States. And so I would encourage you to check out as many of these programs as you can. They're all being recorded, so if you can't make the program at the time that it's listed, you can also come back and find it later on. So the program that Danny mentioned is Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and the program that I was talking about a little bit earlier is at 4 o'clock on Friday. Danny's tip was to try to learn as much English as you can. I think that that's a fantastic tip. And you can see Friday a little bit earlier in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. We'll also be highlighting some free resources that are available through the U.S. Embassy to help people who are interested in learning English. I'm going to switch back to Dylan and see if he has any tips. Can be for international students or just students generally who are interested in continuing their studies.
Definitely, I have a couple tips. So one big tip is definitely just do a lot of research. make sure that it's the college that you really want to go to. Don't just settle for a college that could potentially give you the most of the least help. You definitely want to apply for it and definitely put all into it. So that's a big part of it. Just reach out to the colleges. They have advisors, and their main purpose is to push information out, to let you guys know the different opportunities that they have for you or within their community of college. And then another tip also is, once you know the degree route you want to go, definitely do some research, because if you plan on going to smaller universities or community colleges, some of them might not have the entire program, such as myself. Once I was going to school, I didn't realize that I couldn't finish out my degree at that college. So once I was near the end of my degree, I had to actually transfer to a different college, which is the one I'm currently in, and it's more of an online-based college. But you just have to be careful with transferring, because some of your classes that you've already done may not be recognized at another college. So you'll have to retake those classes or take a different version of that class for it to be recognized at your new college that you end up transferring into. So definitely research is a very huge thing. Just make sure it's what you want and what you're looking for.
Great. If I could ask, like, what are some of the things that you would recommend somebody look at in addition to like the types of programs that are offered? Are there other things that you think are really helpful to be thinking about as you're trying to research different schools?
I mean, I guess a big thing, especially for more international students or even local United States students, the cost of living in certain places. I know a lot of people are more geared toward the bigger cities such as New York or California. You're definitely gonna have a bigger cost of living. So as Danny said earlier, you're staying on campus and you're working, but some of the events out in town are going to be a little more expensive. Food's going to be a little more expensive. So it might be harder to actually get out and do things, or, if you're trying to study and maybe also travel to see certain areas, might be a little harder to do that. Versus if you go to smaller universities or community colleges or different states that aren't bigger or well-known, your cost of living isn't going to be that much. So you might be able to get out and, go travel to New York on a weekend or on a holiday break, and you'll have a little extra money that you'll be able to do that with. So that would be one of the biggest things I think to look for also.
Great tips. Please feel free to put questions in the chat if you have them. We have a few more minutes and we're certainly open to any questions that you might have. While we wait to see if any questions come in, I'm going to ask some questions that I'm just personally curious about. And so I would love to hear from each of you, like what your favorite class was that you took.
That's very difficult. Well, when I was studying, one of my favorite things that I had the opportunity to do was study abroad, which it sounds like you guys are also interested in if you're interested in studying in the United States, since that would be abroad for you. But I got to study in Argentina and for one semester, and I was studying journalism. So I think my favorite class was one where we basically just treated the class as if we were a newsroom, as if we were a newspaper. So we got to go out and find things that we thought were interesting and talk to people and then write articles about it. So I thought that was a really interesting experience. That was probably my favorite class.
Sounds great.
For me, I think one of my interesting classes was to learn more of the court system that we have in the United States, and then also some of the laws that we have that I wasn't aware of before taking certain classes. So I think my more favorite one would have been just learning the court system and different laws to be able to help people out.
I love hearing that. My favorite class was, maybe not surprisingly, argumentation, which was a communications class, but it was about debates and being able to look at like two different perspectives on a particular topic. But part of what I liked was that it was like really hands-on, right? Like we were given topics to research, and then got to debate them in the classroom, which was very fun. And one more question for both of you. Is there like a particular event or something that your university is like, or school is well known for? So maybe it's like, like a fun event, something unique about the campus, something that you particularly enjoyed about the experience.
Mine is not a specific event, but I think something very cool about going to New York University is that you're in the middle of New York, and it's also really well known for its acting and filmmaking programs. So you sometimes run into actors that you know from movies. Like, for example, the American actor James Franco was studying at NYU at the same time I was. So sometimes I'd go in to get my coffee at the college coffee shop, and he would be sitting there studying. So that was kind of fun.
That was fun.
I think for smaller communities such as myself, they're kind of all over the world. It's not just specific to us, but like marathons and like the mud runs and color runs, they were kind of exciting for us because obviously being a smaller community, we didn't have a ton of that stuff around. So when those would come in, it would definitely be a big event for the college and the community to come out and just enjoy a day together. So
It's great. Something I would enjoy as well.
yeah.
The University of Montana, like one of the fun facts about it is it used to be, I don't know if this is still the case, the only university to own a mountain, which is a great selling point for anybody who's an outdoor enthusiast. And then in terms of big events, like the big event on campus was the lumberjack ball, because forestry and timber is like a really important industry in Montana. And so they would put on a ball that people would wear blue jeans and plaid shirts to in the fall. So those are kind of the fun, unique things about the campus. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think that we can call it a wrap. Want to thank all of you who took time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it. Hope that you came away with some good tips, some things to think about, questions to ask as you're researching schools. If we could advance to the next slide, I want to put in just a quick plug for the American centers that are spread throughout the Kyrgyz Republic. These are great places to get additional resources for learning English or for studying abroad. So please, if you're located in any of these cities and you want to participate in talking clubs or do English language learning, or be able to connect with the Education USA advisor, these are all great locations to do that. So please check them out if you haven't already. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you to both of you for taking time out of your day and participating in this session. It's appreciated.
Thank you.
Goodbye and thank you, everyone.